Now, whilst Theresa May was in Paris and Berlin, back home in the Commons, 97 of her MPs voted against her desire for a Brexit extension, and 80 Tory MPs, including 12 ministers, didn't vote at all. She's asked to postpone departure until June the 30th, but the European Council President has said tonight he doesn't think that gives her time to overcome the deep divisions in Westminster. He wants Europe's leaders to discuss an extension of up to a year when they meet for their emergency summit in Brussels tomorrow. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary.
Well, that letter you were just quoting from Donald Tusk talks about there being little reason to believe that Theresa May can get her deal in the sort of timescale that she's asking for, so by the end of June, and saying that there's going to be a much longer extension needed. She's very concerned that although the EU 27 have been acting very solidly, more solidly than a lot of people expected through the Brexit negotiations, when it comes to this whole business of the extension, the whole room has been a little bit more fluid. And part of the reason she's been in Berlin and Paris is to try and nail down exactly what she can expect tomorrow. We've also had today a bit of a boost to the Labour talks with the government, and a new cast list, people like John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, the Chancellor himself being in the room. But the EU leaders are following events in this country extremely closely. If they thought those talks were going somewhere, and they are very plugged in, they wouldn't be writing a letter like this. The other event that's been going on today, you were talking about MPs voting on the extension. Theresa May is really staring at an extraordinary collapse of party discipline on this issue. That whole business of extending the deadline has no friends really in the Conservative Party. Everybody's doing it, or just about everybody with a heavy heart. Less than a third of the support she got in the House of Commons this afternoon was from Conservative MPs. Tomorrow, she's going to go to Brussels, who are watching that vote and everything else that's going on here. And there is, it has to be said, amongst those 27 leaders, little faith that this country knows at all what it is doing on Brexit. And who can really blame them?
In Paris this evening for talks with President Macron, Theresa May has been hurtling around Europe today, trying to make sure the EU gives her a second Brexit delay without too many painful strings attached. Earlier, the Prime Minister quickly worked out on arrival at the German Chancellor's office in Berlin that Angela Merkel wasn't on the doorstep to greet her, and so she walked straight in. Angela Merkel quickly took her outside again so the red carpet photos could happen. Inside, the two discussed what the EU might offer. Sources confirmed it was not what one cabinet minister back home suggested, a rewrite of the withdrawal agreement.
What I think would be fantastic is if Angela Merkel will try to support a proper UK Brexit by agreeing to reopen the withdrawal agreement.
Europe ministers gathering in Luxembourg ahead of the EU summit tomorrow promised there would be an extension of some kind, but patience is wearing thin.
We have been here in the same one just a couple of weeks ago, and we cannot afford, frankly, to be every 2 weeks discussing the same issue without a plan.
We do everything we can do to avoid no deal Brexit.
So no deal on Friday?
Certainly not.
In place of the current deadline for Britain's departure this Friday, Theresa May is asking for a departure date at the end of June, which Brussels believes she asked for, fully expecting the EU to demand a longer delay, with an earlier opt-out possible if Theresa May wins a miracle Commons victory in the next few weeks, otherwise a new deadline for departure at the end of December. There's even been talk of a longer delay to March next year, but France has been leading the opposition to that and focusing on what conditions might be imposed on Britain if it hangs around in the EU into the summer and beyond.
We want to understand what the UK needs this extension for and what is the political surroundings around Theresa May to have this extension. And then comes the question of the conditions of what role want the UK to play during this extension time.
Those conditions are expected to include Britain promising not to obstruct EU business, like budget talks or the appointment of a new Commission president. Some MPs today were warning of exactly that kind of disruption if Britain stays in.
A new Conservative government
led by someone like Boris or Dominic Raab, might well vote down your budget, veto your attempts at greater military integration. If you now try to hold us in against our will, you will be facing perfidious Albion on speed.
Supporters of a second referendum want a long extension, hoping opinion has more time to shift. They unveiled 2 new recruits to the cause today, including former Speaker of the Commons, Betty Boothroyd, and a parliamentary aide who thought his presence here would probably lose him his job.
I am here today because I have come on a journey, and that journey is about to go in a different direction for me from a career perspective. Probably already has the last 2 minutes. But
government talks with the Labour leadership were beefed up today with the Shadow Chancellor and the Chancellor amongst the extra faces round the table.
Well, we're going to hear what the government has to say.
Theresa May will hope images like this convince the EU there's a real purpose to the extension. The European Council President this evening sent a note to all EU leaders saying he still sees little reason to believe there will be a breakthrough on Brexit here anytime soon.
Well, I'm joined now by the Prisons Minister, Rory Stewart. Rory Stewart, could we just look at those talks that are still going on? They've really been going on a remarkably long time, a week effectively. Is there any headway whatever between Labour and the Conservatives in these talks?
I think the real question is will. Their actual formal positions are very, very close, as you know. So if the two sides want to make a deal, it's pretty easy to get a deal through.
But do they?
Well, that's the question. And I think the problem is that there's obviously problems that you're aware of, challenges you'll be aware of on our side. On the Labour side, there are probably 80 Labour MPs who've now signalled that they want a second referendum. And there will be many Labour voters who will feel that signing up for a deal will deliver some form of Brexit and they won't remain. So there is a management problem here. But ultimately,
and from a Conservative point of view, a second referendum is out.
From a Conservative point of view, a second referendum is out. But there is a lot of possibility of movement on the political declaration. So if people were up for a Brexit deal of some sort and sensible compromises within that, I think there could be movement. And I think that is quite important because if we are to protect the centre ground of British politics, we have to try to avoid the lurch to extremes. So I think the danger, if we can't get a deal through, is that there will be a big push then for a no-deal Brexit.
Well, now, could we just look at what's gone in the Commons today? I mean, quite unbelievable scenes. We've had 80 Tory MPs not vote at all, 12 of them ministers, and 97 vote against the government, while poor Mrs May was out there in Berlin and in Paris. They're actually voting against what she's asking for, an extension.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I'm personally anxious about. I believe in the end, the reason for our country holding together is that we have a centre ground in politics and that we don't lurch, as many European countries do, towards extremes. The danger, though, in the votes that you saw today is there's increasing appetite for a no-deal Brexit. No-deal Brexit which would be unnecessary, which would be damaging, but worse than that.
But which after tonight will be illegal anyway.
Yes, the problem, though, will be that even if it's illegal technically in Parliament, if we can't get a deal through, there will be people who will start trying to campaign, possibly in a leadership contest, to go, for example, into a general election pushing for a no-deal Brexit. So I think people need to be very, very concerned about the dangers of a no-deal Brexit, or indeed, from my point of view, the polarising dangers of running a second referendum. I think a deal has to be the moderate answer here.
But the problem surely now is the Prime Minister's more or less lost all authority in her own party. There's Mr Fox, the Trade Secretary, saying he will resign if there's any further talk of, or even any possible deal over a customs union. I mean, well, how many ministers can you afford to lose if we do have a customs union?
There's no minimising the fact that we are in a very difficult situation. The Prime Minister has taken a big political risk. She's decided to reach out to Labour. That's unpopular with some people in our party. Compromise is unpopular with a lot of people who want no deal. And of course, she's also said that she's not going to lead us into the next election. So she is, I think, genuinely trying to deliver what she sees as a moderate practical solution to avoid what she sees as worse things. But it's a tricky place to be.
But there is a reality tonight, and that is that given the votes and the non-votes of Tories tonight, She's no longer running a Conservative government. She's there thanks to the other parties. This has never happened in history.
Well, it is very, very difficult. And from my point of view, as somebody who thinks the Prime Minister's on the right side of this and supports her very strongly, because I think a no-deal Brexit would be damaging and unnecessary, I'm very worried about that too. I need to try to reach out to Conservative members and Conservative MPs and say, we're going to have to come back here. We can't push for something which would be extremely dangerous. We have to hold the centre ground.
Minister, thank you very much for coming to talk to us in very difficult circumstances.
Thank you.
Could you possibly please just be quiet for a moment? Thank you so much. Well, for more on that draft offer that emerged from the EU, let's go to our Europe editor, Matt Fry, who's in Brussels. Matt.
Not quite as noisy here, John, although a little bit of, babble in the background. So let's talk about this letter, first of all. This letter by Donald Tusk was extraordinarily impassioned, and really what came across is that he has very little faith in any of these sort of cross-party talks between the Tories and Labour coming to fruition, but also whether Theresa May is going to be in a position to actually come good on any deal that there might be. They've lost trust in her, they've lost trust in the British political system, which is why he wants a long delay, and he doesn't want what he calls these kind of rolling extensions. They've really run out of nails to bite in this city. They want this long delay either to the end of the year, possibly the beginning of next year, and if by some miracle we get a deal together, then we can leave whenever we want. But the point in all this, John, is that they hold all the cards. Any one of these 27 meeting here tomorrow, listening to Theresa May making her pitch, can call a veto, which means the whole thing goes away and we leave on Friday night without a deal. And they're going to impose, we think, some pretty strict conditions, almost treating us like some naughty schoolboys. So no meddling in the choice of an EU Commission president, no meddling in the budget. Yes, we have to take part in the EU elections, but we're not going to have much power attached to that. So, if you're talking about a history of humiliation, this is pretty bad, I have to say.
Well, now, is there, Matt, any danger tonight that we might not be granted an extension at all?
John, there's always a danger. Remember, the last time Theresa May was here, the longer she spoke to the 27, the less they actually believed her. She made the case so badly that she lost allies in the room. So there's always that danger, frankly, which is why she went to Paris and to Berlin today to kind of prep the territory for her talks tomorrow. But the other thing, of course, is that there was a rather interesting line in Donald Tusk's letter talking about no side needs to be humiliated in this process. They're very conscious, as Gary said earlier, of all the stuff that's being said in London. They're very conscious of the fact that the ERG, or some of them, have been talking about this being another Versailles Treaty. They also know about, Mark Francois' threat of becoming a Trojan horse in the EU, and Jacob Rees-Mogg's tweet last week about being the awkward squad, and so on. They really don't want us to be the awkward squad again, which is why they've set up these conditions. And of course, if anyone is tempted to veto it, maybe because of that. And by the way, just one other very quick thing. Donald Tusk was on the phone to the Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, tonight, who, if anyone might veto this process, is definitely in the likely squad. But before I came to Brussels, I spoke to Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, and I asked him whether he'd been in contact with EU leaders.
Of course, I keep in touch with European leaders, but essentially, despite what the Conservatives keep saying, is Tony Blair trying to undermine our position? No one need undermine their position, frankly. They are doing a brilliant job of doing it themselves. No, all I've been saying to them privately, which is what I've said publicly, is that in the end, there is a process that we can get to that will resolve this sensibly. But when you see all this chaos and confusion, don't become impatient over it, and don't lose heart that we've just, completely lost the plot.
But you can understand why they've lost heart.
Exactly.
And they would have a perfect excuse to veto our extension.
And that's why it's so important that people like me explain to them, no, actually, although it looks like chaos and confusion, and though at one level it is chaos and confusion, out of it can actually come a resolution.
You weren't in favour of the last referendum, the one in 2016.
No.
But you do want to see another referendum?
Yes, because I think having taken the first decision by referendum, now that we have voted to leave, you can't, I think, reverse that decision unless you put it before the people again.
What makes you think that if we had another referendum, and let's say Remain won, that the nation wouldn't be just as divided or more divided than it is right now?
Well, look, if there were an ideal solution, I'd love it, but there isn't one. If the choice is put honestly before people, I think that there would be a much greater understanding of why this has proven so difficult and the magnitude of the decision we're taking.
But it's also about the legitimacy of Westminster. I mean, the process of an erosion of trust in the parliamentary process started under you, arguably. And if we decide, if the country decides to hold another referendum, then many people in this country will say, I'm never going to vote again.
But I think you've got to say to people that's not a rational way to behave. You shouldn't lose trust in Parliament, in what Parliament's been doing these last few months. And one of the tragedies of this situation is this attempt, parts of the media, I'm afraid the Prime Minister from time to time, to mobilise the people against the Parliament. The Parliament has been doing what the Parliament's put there to do. The reason why they're not supporting her deal is they're studying the detail.
What words strike less horror in your mind? The words Prime Minister Boris Johnson or Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, first of all, I vote Labour. I'm a member of the Labour Party.
You are still?
Yes, and he's the leader of the Labour Party. For me, to end up with a hard Brexiteer in charge of the Tory Party would be a disaster for the country, and I hope that doesn't happen. But I don't. By the way, I think it's not the right time to change the Prime Minister right now. I don't think it's the right time for a general election. I think we've got to deal with Brexit on its own merits.
There are many people in the City of London or in business here who say, we don't like the idea of Brexit at all, but what really terrifies us is Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn.
What I say to them is, I understand their concerns, but...
You share their concerns?
Look, I'm not making any secret of the fact I don't agree with the direction of the leadership of the Labour Party and its present leadership, just as they don't agree with me. I mean, it's fine, we can disagree. But that's not the issue for me today. The issue is Brexit. And what I say to people in the business, in the city, is this Brexit question. Look, I know you guys want certainty, and in some ways you would prefer just to do whatever deal there is and get Brexit over and done with. But I'm afraid this is a bigger issue than the concerns of capital or business. This is about the future of this country.
And do you, Tony Blair, feel politically homeless today when you look at the party political landscape?
Obviously, for the Labour leadership, it's moved very far to a left position that I think, personally, is a form of left conservatism, really. I don't think it meets the challenge of the modern world, particularly what I think is the single biggest challenge of the modern world, which is the forthcoming technological revolution. And the Tory party, as you can see from its grassroots, and I've spoken to a few Tories in the last few weeks, they've got a kind of right-wing Trotskyism coming into the Tory party. I mean, you've got a polarisation of British politics in a way that's profoundly unhelpful to its future.
So the obvious question then is, why are you still a member of the Labour Party? Why didn't you join Change UK, the Tiggers? That's your natural home, isn't it?
I've been a member of the Labour Party for over 40 years.
Yeah, but people change their mind.
They do, but it's, I have a deep sense of loyalty to the Labour Party, and, I'm not prepared to give that up.
Thank you very much, Tony
Blair.